Alberta appears to be on a bit of a tear recently. 3 big wins for Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. First, it was the pipeline proposal with the federal government, albeit to a southern route, not the northwest coast. Then an announcement of a pipeline proposal with Ontario that would take oil from Hardisty, Alberta to Sarnia, Ontario. And then finally, the big one, just a couple of days ago, Meta doing a $13 billion investment in an AI data center north of Edmonton.
I'm happy to stand here today and say that Alberta's government has formally filed our West Coast oil pipeline submission to the Federal Major Projects Office for Project of National Interest listing under the Building Canada Act. After signing an agreement last year to work together with Alberta and Saskatchewan to build new pipelines through an economic corridor from Alberta to Ontario, the government of Ontario is here today to unveil a potential route for a new 3,300-kilometer oil pipeline from Hardisty, Alberta to Sarnia, Ontario. Meta has announced plans to build its first Canadian data center in Alberta, representing an investment of more than $13 billion in our province.
So what's happening? Are these real proposals? Are these, pardon the pun, but pipe dreams? Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. I'm Brian Lilly, your host. We're going to look at the 3 proposals, but also the overall investment climate for Alberta and Canada. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? To help us figure this out as someone who knows the investment world well, Brett Wilson, you know him. You've seen him on Dragon's Den. He's been an investment banker for a decade. He heads up Prairie Merchant Bank in Calgary, and he joins us from his offices there. Brett, it's been a pretty impressive week. Whether you like Danielle Smith or don't, and I'm pretty sure you like her, you got to look at this and go, these are 3 big wins.
Well, to start with, I'm a fan of Alberta. I'm a fan of Canada. And within that, I love the way Danielle is trying to work with the noise and nonsense. She's very much aligned with Scott Moe. Scott Moe, more than any other premier, seems to understand the value of natural resources, the value of the West. Little confusion with Eby, little confusion with Wab Canoe, but Ford seems to be now aligned with all the noise. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. We're getting pipelines. We need power lines. There's a lot of things we need, and it looks like we're making some progress.
All right. So the last week, though, from a business point of view and a political point of view, how would you rate Smith's last week?
Well, the Meta data center has been underway for about 8 months. I ended up working in the background with some of the politics and bureaucrats. I'm not invested in it, but I'm a huge believer in data centers, and I am in the power business. So we had been talking to Meta, and we'll continue to talk to Meta and anyone else who wants to build another data center in Alberta. But what they're doing up in Sturgeon County is unbelievable. A $13+ billion investment. The cash that's going to come out of that for Alberta is extraordinary. So here's Meta saying, we want to dance, we want to play. And what was really interesting is there wasn't a single person from Ontario, Ottawa in particular, at the press conference. So in other words, the federal government had nothing to do with this major project, even though they claimed...
And they have a minister for AI.
I like him. I was on his show a few times, but he just isn't engaged. He just isn't connecting. He isn't part of...
It surprises me that Evan Solomon wouldn't have been there, though.
Maybe he didn't know that we were having the press conference. But he wasn't invited. And but yeah, I sat in on the press conference because I'm very close to the folks at Meta, and I'm very close to the electricity group. And in fact, Meta specifically thanked Nathan Neudorf and me for our roles in helping in the background. But the real point is that the government intervention has been all positive. And people are kind of going, well, just a minute, did you check the water? Did you check the power? Did you check the gas? Did you check the land? And I'm going, just a minute. They've spent 8 months getting this organized, maybe a year, in fact. It's well organized. It's well underway. And in fact, I think construction physically starts this week.
We'll talk about the data center in depth in a couple of moments. But first off, let me ask you, what is happening with all this different investment or potential investment in Alberta? Is it just that Premier Smith is setting the right tone? Is it the geography and the natural resources? You know, as one of my media colleagues said, feels like an oil boom out here right now, and the oil industry is doing okay, but it's not oil boom times.
Well, it's a little bit of everything natural resource based, but let's go back to the fall when the MOU was announced and clean energy regulations were punted and Guilbeault quit. That was one of the most powerful positive messages for natural resource development imaginable. I'm in the electricity business. We weren't going to build another power plant ever under the MOU rule, under the CER, Clean Energy Regulations, where after 10 years you had to pump the excess CO2, whatever defined excess as, and how you'd pump it, where you'd pump it, why you'd pump it. All that was unknown, but that was going to be Guilbeault's rules. So they took him out. The good news is that we can now build power plants. The great news is we can add data centers. We need more power in Canada. We need more power everywhere. Alberta is reasonably flush. We have a lot of natural resource based, call it natural gas. We also have an awful lot of renewables. The renewables are not reliable, so consumers end up effectively paying for both renewables and reliable, the natural gas. I get annoyed and frustrated by that, but here we are, and we've got a great platform to work from.
I mean, look, Alberta moving towards natural gas is actually a good thing from an environmental point of view because Alberta has long used coal.
Yep.
And there's no way to slice it. Coal's not great. It's better than freezing to death, but if you've got better alternatives, use them. Is Alberta looking at, or is anyone in Alberta looking at moving towards nuclear, large scale, or small modular reactors? I know Premier Kenny, when he was still in office, signed on to Ford's MOU with Moe and with Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick about the small modular reactors. Is Alberta looking at nuclear at all?
Very much so. So the Henusset family is very active. I was actually talking to them yesterday. They were wondering if they got a data center developed quickly, if they could use my power plant until they got their nuclear plant up and running. So there's obviously nuclear takes 10, 15 years. They're hoping 7 to 10 right now. So that's an acceleration over where it once was. But no, so nuclear is a big part of the future, but it's really big for Saskatchewan in particular. Saskatchewan is still burning thermal coal, as is China. China's expanding its thermal coal fleet. Saskatchewan's still burning coal, and amazingly, there's no noise at all. We produce virtually no thermal coal in the West, other than in Saskatchewan, but we do produce metallurgical coal, which is valuable.
The thermal coal plant, the main one in Saskatchewan is Estevan, and I've visited that to see with former Premier Brad Wall to see the carbon capture and storage, which is now raised up as a big issue again when it comes to the Pathways project and bringing forward a federal pipeline. So let's talk about the federal pipeline now. My colleague Lauren Gunter thought this would never be built. There were lots of people who said they would never get this far. Were you one of the people that said there's never going to be a West Coast pipeline, too many things in the way? What was your view of this before the MOU and this recent announcement?
Well, the greatest impediment to building pipelines was regulatory approvals. And regulatory means local communities, it means Indigenous, it means provincial, it means municipal, it means federal, it means all those approvals. So the fact that there's no apparent business that wants to build pipelines, they're all going to sit on the sidelines and wait until they see where this noise settles. And that's where I was a huge fan of the Northern pipeline. The route makes sense. It's efficient. It's a great place to develop. Carney I sat with him and chatted, and he promised that he would modify the tanker ban in due course. And modify meaning just change it enough that enough tankers could run as they do up and down the coast. Why not in and out? So he had promised that was a given, but clearly EB, and I would call it some First Nation noise. I'm partnered with First Nations in the Yukon. We just invested heavily through the Yukon in Prince Rupert with an Indigenous group. We believe in the Indigenous groups believe that there's more for Prince Rupert. Now, the reality is LNG and LNG pipelines will be an integral part of what happens in the north. The southern route, which is effectively the third pipeline in the Trans Mountain route. So we've got Trans Mountain, we've got Enbridge, both dancing, both playing. They're going to develop and expand enough that Alberta will have all the excess capacity it needs for the foreseeable future. And by that, I mean 3 to 5 years.
So I hear your statement on the northern route. Much more, it's the straight shot to Asia. It's the closest route. It less time to transit product. How do you weigh that off against the benefit of going on the southern route and you're essentially using existing right of way, which means it should speed things up?
I think the Northern Route is going to get parked. It just doesn't have the momentum when you've got EB fighting, and he's even reluctantly saying, I'm going to shut up and stop complaining. That's more or less what he said, because he's getting paid off to do that. So he's allowing that route to go. And the noise in terms of the North, still to be amplified, still to be dealt with. But again, that'll be an LNG pipeline, not an oil pipeline. And that'll come in due course. I'm confident that Prince Rupert's got every reason to grow. My Indigenous partners wouldn't be investing in the Prince Rupert region if we didn't believe in the future. So I'm heavily on side with that. The confusion comes. There was no noise whatsoever, by the way, Brian, when the Keystone XL pipeline was effectively repurposed as the South Bow and whatever the Americans call their version.
Bridger.
Yeah. So we're effectively building a pipeline that Trudeau wasn't supportive of, that Biden canceled, that Obama canceled, but we've now got that pipeline quietly going ahead. Now they're doing route work, they're doing supply work, but again, that's private industry building a pipeline, and nobody's talking about it because it's private industry building a pipeline. Well, wow. And so the North pipeline, I think, has been parked. I think that route is still a concept, in particular for LNG, but the Southern pipeline is all that's been approved. And I don't think there's any point in debating that anymore. I think real money will come.
Well, Premier Smith, on the Northern Pipeline, Premier Smith told me recently that if it goes forward, it will have to be once Indigenous groups in the area step forward and say, look, we're interested, we want to partner, because otherwise there's just too much, as you say, noise. Although, many of the groups in and around Prince Rupert would be supportive of it, but you've got this activist group called Coastal First Nations, which is not a First Nation in and of itself. It's a not-for-profit set up in Vancouver with American activist money, 20-odd years ago, that their original name, their legal name still, is the Great Bear Rainforest Society.
Mm-hmm.
And then they rebranded as Coastal First Nations, and most of my media colleagues treat them as if it's an actual First Nations band. And so they have some say in this. No, they don't. But
I was speaking with several First Nations that I'm close to, and I said, I'd like to start a group called Prairie First Nations, and I'll be the leader. And they looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, you got Coastal First Nations without anyone who's a leader. What does it matter? And again, foreign funded, they're clearly anti-resource development, and they're not in favor of the First Nations even playing a thoughtful political role in what's going on there. And as I shared, I've got 14 First Nations in the Yukon as partners. I've got 6 First Nations signed up as partners with a coal mine that I'm developing in northern Alberta. And I've got 6 First Nations in North Battleford, who I work collaboratively with as we try to grow how we work as a community. And so I'm working with, what's that, total of 22, 25 First Nations, and not one of them is opposed to the growing of our economy. It's thoughtful. I mean, we've had lots of problems with confusion over hereditary versus elected chiefs. We've had a lot of confusion over whether a First Nation should say we're completely opposed so they can get paid more. That's what's been happening. And that's history has proven it. And that's what causes them not to collaborate, which is my pitch. Why don't we sit down at the table, arm wrestle a bit, figure out what's right, make sure we take care of your family, and they're in the second and third generation on the reserve, and let's take care of everyone. But we can do this if we work together.
Are you expecting any Indigenous concerns or activist groups to try and stop the Southern route, given that it, as I mentioned, essentially runs along the same right-of-way as TMX, follows the same path?
There's a bit of new routing. They've got to have a new, I know we're going to go to a new terminal, so there's some work to be done there. So there'll be some work to do to solve those. But again, the bulk of the route is existing relationships. Are the First Nations going to ask for more? For sure. But is that doable and achievable? I mean, they've all signed deals. They've all been taken care of. So the probability of a solution in a timely manner is pretty high.
David Eby, billions flowing his way into the NDP government of British Columbia. We saw the housing condo bailout. We saw and plus another $3.2 billion in housing. And then we found out, well, he's also going to get, there's some tolls on the pipeline that they're going to get paid for everything that goes through. Did taxpayers overpay to get David Eby to shut up?
I'm convinced that EB is one of the greatest impediments to Canada, to the West, to natural resources. His disdain for everything. And I mean, just spend 2 seconds on that condo issue. Bailing out condo developers? Where the hell did that come from? And I'm having trouble not dropping F bombs. It makes no sense whatsoever to bail out those guys. If they lose money developing it, they write it off at a federal level on tax, but they don't need a bailout. I just don't get it. I don't see it. I don't understand it.
And you're saying that as someone who's probably taken a few haircuts over the years when it comes to your investments.
Hmm. I'm heavily invested in the Kelowna region right now. We were looking at building 5 towers. The inbound interest in building those towers disappeared the moment the Cowichan and the noise around who actually owns the BC lands. Lots of confusion over First Nations. Do they have rights? What is EB giving them? EB says everything's fine. First Nations go, yeah, we like everything we're going to get. Nobody really knows what they're going to get. And I can tell you right now that businesses have shut down their interest in helping me develop in Kelowna. And I don't have the balance sheet to build 5 towers, but the guys in Vancouver who would have said, whoa, can't play right now. And that's because we still need to solve, call it the EB problem.
Why would you if you don't know who's going to own the land? Yeah, we had Dwight Newman from the University of Saskatchewan, a legal scholar, on to talk about that whole issue around Squamish, around Musqueam, and property rights. And his take was that all the people saying there's nothing to worry about are wrong. He also said all the people saying your property rights are gone already are wrong. He said there's a lot of confusion. And I said, well, if I'm a property owner, should I be worried? He said, yes. That's enough uncertainty for anyone to back out of a land deal at that point.
The way my partner and I are looking at what we've got going on in Kelowna is that we're going to continue to run the businesses that are on the land, but we're going to park the idea of redevelopment for a decade. There's just no point in expanding. And I've got inbound. I've got some land over in West Kelowna. I've got 3 major retailers wanting me to build on my own land. And even now I'm hesitant. And that's with inbound. We didn't phone them, they phoned us. So there's people who want to do stuff in Kelowna or in BC. There's just confusion.
Back to the pipeline, you said that you're pretty sure a private sector proponent will come forward. So you seem sure that this is going to happen. There are folks in the oil patch that are saying, oh, no, there's only a 50-50 chance this will happen. It's a lot of very skeptical people on this. You don't share the skepticism that the pipeline will actually proceed one day and be financially viable.
So I have some off the record conversations with people in the pipeline business, but let's be clear, there isn't a single pipeline company that's going to wave a flag and say, oh yeah, we'll do it. Until all the regulatory uncertainty is solved, and that's the idea of the MOU started it, the announcement now of the Southern Pipeline route makes a huge difference to allowing real conversations in the background. And is Enbridge dancing? Is Trans Mountain dancing? And Trans Mountain has the balance sheet because they're federally owned. Are they going to do it? The odds are high, very, very high. The question is, how much do we need to expand our oil production in Alberta? So we've got obviously the new corridor, which Doug Ford and Smith announced in terms, and they call it a corridor. It's not a pipeline route, but the idea is getting better routing from Alberta down into Sarnia rather than looping through the United States, which is the shortest route, the most logical route. But as you know, the province or the state of
Michigan.
Michigan has attempted to undermine our own pipeline, which is our oil coming into the U.S. and back out of the U.S. And Michigan's still getting in the way.
Well, and it also there's a spur line on it that supplies a good chunk of Michigan and the Chicagoland area.
They need the product, but by the way, we still haven't solved getting a bridge working. We can't get a bridge to work in that same region. So there's lots of confusion over, call it cross-border disdain, but these are all solvables. That's from my perspective, that the idea of a route, of a corridor, whether it's ultimately used for pipelines or power lines or however we want to connect our country. And there's talk of electricity being the greatest issue ultimately in terms of how we produce it and where we deliver it. But I'm a big fan still of what we're doing. And these pipelines, again, let's not forget, Keystone XL, effectively approved. The pipeline to the West Coast, effectively approved. And are there economic providers in the background working on that? Well, Enbridge and Trans Mountain are real. And now the question is, how much does the government fund various Indigenous groups? How are they going to help various parties? And I think Indigenous will be a big part of the next step in terms of what's announced.
Well, let's take a break and then come back and talk about that Doug Ford proposal. And it really is an Ontario-driven proposal to get a pipeline from the west to the east. I think that's great politics and good for national unity. We'll talk about that when we come back with Brett Wilson. But first, we've got merch. Have you checked out the merch that you can get for Post Media? From hoodies to hats to tote bags, mugs, and more, you can now shop official Post Media. You can insert your local brand here. Do you want the Calgary Herald? Do you want the Toronto Sun? Do you want National Post? We've got stylish ways for you to show off your connection to trusted journalism, and it looks good too. I've got my Toronto Sun dad ball cap, they call it. It's fantastic. Visit postmedia.store to shop the collection today. That's postmedia.store.
You're a political junkie, right? I mean, that's why you're listening to this podcast.
But if you're not in the loop with Post Media's VIP political hack, then you're not getting even close to the whole politics story.
I'm Stuart Thompson, Parliamentary Bureau Chief.
And I'm political analyst Tasha Carradine.
We head up the team that brings Political Hack members the exclusive political intel that goes so much deeper than the news, with inside stories, sharp analysis, and behind-the-scenes scoops from Parliament Hill and beyond.
With our twice-weekly newsletters, exclusive reports from Washington, D.C., early access to John Ivison columns, and subscriber-only videos and events, Hack members get insider insight into the minds of the strategists, policy gurus, and power brokers shaping Canada's political future.
You don't want to miss all that, do you?
I sure don't. And you can get all now for less than $1 a week. Just go to nationalpost.com/newsletters to sign up.
That's nationalpost.com/newsletters.
So much is happening in politics right now. Rising tensions with the U.S. on trade and defense.
Not one, but two provincial separatist movements gaining real ground.
The Liberals trying to hang on to a razor-thin majority as the economy stumbles and with the cost of living still rising.
It's exciting.
Extremely exciting.
But the only way to get behind the scenes and right into the source code of what politicians and the people around them are really thinking is to get Political Hack.
Go to nationalpost.com/newsletters.
And join us.
The Northern Shield Energy Corridor will include a new pipeline built using Canadian steel by Canadian workers that will bring oil from Hardisty, Alberta, to new and expanded refineries in Sarnia, Ontario, including Sarnia's vital energy and shipping routes.
That's Ontario Premier Doug Ford talking about his pipeline project. Brett, were you a little surprised to hear an Ontario Premier talk about he wants to build a pipeline to transport Alberta oil? It's not what you really think about at the moment.
It wasn't my expectation. And part of it is my historical frustration that we've imported oil from other parts of the world for the East Coast to refine and process. And we have some oil going to the west or to the east from Western Canada. But the amount of oil that we bring in, and people say, well, it's not that big a deal. Well, yeah, but we're losing economically the ability to produce our own oil and paying foreign countries that don't care about the environment or the politics of North America. They don't care at all. And so it's been confusing. And so that's where, with Doug Ford stepping up, and as you know, Wab Kinew didn't seem to be at the press conference, and Scott Moe said, we're on side. But
yeah.
Kinew has basically said, we're not there. We're not going to support this. And with Wab Kinew and Naheed Nenshi effectively now reporting to Avi Lewis, who's anti-fuel, fossil fuels, period, how does the NDP play a role in developing our country? And that confuses Eby, it confuses Nenshi, it confuses Wab Kinew.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Kinew's not there. Ford did say, I get along great with him. He's a good guy. We'll try and bring him on side. I mean, let's see. Ford spent years in sales. Let's see if he can do that. Hopefully he can. Is it a pipe dream, though? I mean, 3,300 kilometers. That's a very long pipeline, goes through some rough terrain, goes over the head of Lake Superior, loops around, back down to Sarnia, the origins of Canada's oil and petrochemicals sector. That's why Sarnia has long been a processing plant. It's the terminus of Line 5, which currently brings your oil. And by the way, in defense of my province, we're 80 to 85% Canadian oil and 15% imported. Once you get past us, it flips.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
flips
No,
completely. And we need to fix that. But um,
well, that goes
with
back to the big question, though, Brian. Global reliability. And if the Strait of Hormuz is concerning us, then why aren't we focused on improving our own capacity to produce oil from our own natural resource and use it as a country? So the idea of increasing what we ship to Ontario is to me, it's compelling. Now, how are they going to get? I mean, some of the pipe will be overground. Some of it's going to go through existing right-of-ways and lots of confusion. But this isn't the first time pipelines have been built. And in fact, pipelines are being built left, right, and center all over the United States of America. And there's no noise. It's just happening. They're just doing it.
Well, and I think that's what we should be doing. But, Ford's been pretty adept at dealing with First Nations groups trying to get the Ring of Fire. He got them to lead a Indigenous-led environmental assessment on the Ring of Fire for the road to get up there. There's still a lot of hurdles there, and there's always going to be. But that has to give you some hope that the bands are looking and saying, okay, we're living in poverty right now. This is not good. This can bring about prosperity, and they can have a Ross Ellis moment to take it back to BC. He had a big change of heart when he was chief in his home band.
Well, and to make somewhat fun of it, I mean, from Alberta, Hardisty, to the Winnipeg, or pardon me, the Manitoba-Ontario border, it's relatively flat. Long slope, maybe a few hundred feet, a few valleys, a couple of rivers, but it's so easy in the context of traversing, however you want to describe it, our provinces. And so ultimately, Scott Moe was on side, and ultimately, Wab Kinu's just going to get paid off to allow a pipeline through his own land, which his people want. He needs revenue. He can't just say, no, we don't do this.
Did you see the polling recently? I think it was it was a Global story. David Aiken at Global got a hold of polling done for the Privy Council office for the PM, and it was 67% across the country agreed with more pipelines, and it was a majority in every province, including Quebec and BC.
Canadians, I think, understand that A, we need electricity, B, we need fossil fuels to run. Like, it's that simple. And they may prefer to be slightly objectionable over environmental concerns and economic sharing and who's got what rights. Those are all debatables. But the end game is that we need the capacity to, again, make and ship electricity and then drill and ship natural gas and crude oil.
The Toronto Star is opposed to this pipeline, which I think is one of the main reasons to say it should go ahead. But the Michigan Democrats, as we talked about earlier, is another reason that I think we have to do this. I don't think that that's going away. And as much as people want to thump their chest about Donald Trump, this has been about 10 years of Democrats in Michigan constantly talking about shutting down this pipeline, and for environmental reasons. The home of the auto industry wants to get rid of fossil fuels. That's not going to end, especially, the Democratic Socialists of America is a rump group that has inserted themselves into the main Democrat Party in the U.S., and they seem to be taking over, including in Michigan. So I think that in the next 10 years, there's a good chance that Line 5 is shut off. The taps are done, and the jets at Pearson will be idled.
Well, that's the outcome. But the good news is if they do that, they themselves are screwed relative to the fuels that they need that are coming in. So there's going to have to be some trade-offs. And it's really confusing as to how a group of people in the United States can say, we won't allow you to have a product that you're shipping to us. It just doesn't ultimately make sense, except for the Democrats, I guess.
All right, to back up and look at all of this, to look at the southern route into Vancouver, to look at South Bow, which, as you mentioned, it's going ahead and nobody's noticing.
Yep.
I call it the Frankenstein Keystone XL because we're reviving part of it from the dead.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
the Ford proposal at this point, you know, sure, Carney's trying to do what he can, carve out for this, carve out for that, but what Premier Smith calls the 9 bad laws still exist.
Yep.
Do you think that to help these projects, other projects, the business climate overall, that they actually need to be repealed or in some cases repealed and replaced?
Well, that's where the nine rules, ranging from tanker bans to all the noise that's been created anti-development, and that's where Hodgson claims to be on side. They've hired Ms. Farrell to be the head of the Major Projects Office. She is brilliant, but I think she's also been forced to sit on her hands. I haven't seen her engage. I haven't seen her be active. I mean, we talk about all these new projects coming, but Meta came to the table without a single element of federal involvement, nothing. And this pipeline that goes from Alberta to through Doug Ford's land, that had no federal involvement at all. And yet everything we're doing in Alberta right now to ship to the East Coast or the West Coast is all tied to what EB and Carney effectively negotiated. So it's kind of bizarre, the fact that we can get a pipeline, the new modified Keystone XL. The route changed a little bit, but it's still the same practical outcome. It's going, and there's very little noise. And now all of a sudden, Doug Ford wants a corridor to take oil from Alberta into Sarnia, which is where they consume and produce and revise, refine, and use oil. It's just bizarre that we've got political confusion over who's in charge.
And as you point out, they do call it a corridor, so it could be more than a pipeline. Could also be the electricity transmission towers.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk of increasing or what they call the interties, but part of that ties to which province can create excess power capacity. And right now, Alberta has just enough. We could ship a bit more, but we're generally tight. And BC claims now that they're going to run short, so they're having a problem trying to figure out why they said no to natural gas fueled power plants in their own province, given the capacity they have for fuel or natural gas. So it's a bit confusing as to where electricity goes on a national basis.
Look, Ontario is trying to expand, but expand to meet their needs. I don't think they're looking to become, although, for Ontario does export to New York State, Michigan, and Wisconsin already. But the only premier I've talked to who really wants to expand is Tim Houston in Nova Scotia. He
Yep.
wants to put out a big offshore wind farm and ship it west. Now, I don't think you can ship that all the way to Alberta.
Yeah, there's inefficiencies in the power lines. The other thing is, so here we have several months ago, the federal government says we're running short of electricity. Not once have I seen any media about the 1.3 gigawatt power line that was built from Ontario or from Quebec, country or the province of Quebec. Don't know what where it started, but down into Queens, effectively shipping into New York. That's 1.3 gigawatts. And again, as a province, Alberta produces 10,000 gigawatts or 10.3 gigawatts, and we got 1.3 gigawatts shipping to the US. And yet we claim nationally that we're running short of power, but we're willing to ship to the US. Well, just a minute, there's a bit of confusion over, and they want to stop us shipping oil or crude through the land. There's some sorting out that has to be done at a pretty high level.
Let's talk about the Meta deal in a bit more detail. Um, how big is the AI economy going to be? Are you invested in AI yet? I don't want to sound like market call on BNN, but are you invested in AI at this point? Is it something that you foresee being beneficial to the economy, detrimental to the economy and jobs? We're seeing progressives and this is on the extreme side of the progressive political movement, literally attacking data centers. Some politicians are saying they'll never have them. Others are saying, well, not that interested because it doesn't generate that many jobs once it's built. What are your thoughts on the AI industry? Everyone seems to want to get in on it. It's a huge part of the S&P 500, perhaps overweighted. We'll see. But what are your thoughts on it overall? Big picture.
A lot of wheels spinning, a lot of confusion over who can do what where. The ability in Alberta to build a power plant and then access adjacent land in remote areas is high. You can't build a major data center in downtown Ontario, Southern Ontario, whatever you want to call it. So it's hard to create those things. I'm a little concerned about where data centers go over the next 10 and 20 years because the technology will continue to improve. So do the data centers get smaller? Do they go higher? Do they need the same amount of electricity? Don't know. But the fact that Meta has made the decision it did to step up at 13 billion, and by the way, I do run a power company, our inbound for the power company in terms of phone calls from data center developers and end users, middlemen. There's a whole series of, in the world of hyperscalers, there's a whole series of people who think they're in charge. They've been calling, and a lot of them are working without a balance sheet, a budget, or the information needed. But I can tell you, if NVIDIA or Meta or Google wanted to build a data center in Alberta, another one, there'd be people able to do that in Alberta because we do have enough power. We have the ability to grow. I think on a global basis, there's confusion over what data centers are going to be.
Yeah. Oh, I think it can be beneficial for jobs. Will it replace some? Yeah, sure. ATMs replace bank tellers, but banks still employ thousands and thousands of people. And this will change work. It doesn't mean it will end work and jobs. That's my view on it.
When I had some conversations with people at Meta and politicians, they talked about they have called a rack tax and the property taxes and whatever. The talk was that this data center over the next 20 years would generate $4 to $5 billion. $4 to $5 billion. You don't need a lot of employees to justify having that kind of money coming into the system.
How big was it that Alberta allowed for what we used to call in the industrial world cogen? So I grew up in Hamilton with the steel mills. Stelco and DeFasto used to cogenerate or generate their own power.
Yep.
Meta's coming in. They're going to start off using power from the grid, but they're building their own power plant. That's what Trump has allowed them to do in the States.
Yep.
There are advantages to being in cold northern Alberta that, as opposed to Nevada.
Yep.
But how important was that part of it? Saying, yeah, you can build your own power center, because some places they would say, oh no, here in Ontario, I could see the NDP freaking out saying, oh no, power plants must be publicly owned, even though not all of ours are.
Yeah, see, Alberta is completely independent in that sense. We are all privately owned by whether it's TransAlta or my company Maxim or the various power companies, Pembina, Kineticor. There's lots of people who own electricity generation, and they're growing, TransAlta, et cetera, et cetera. That's what makes Alberta different. But the fact is that when they set it up, they created a platform where there was a zero tax if you have your own power, a 1% tax if you rely in part on the local grid up to a certain capacity, and then 2% if you had no other no other supply except the grid. So there's some pretty healthy fines or penalties or fees payable. But that goes back to the big picture. There's very few people who really understand how to build and operate a power plant, which is why in the case of this project, Green Lights, I think they're calling it, Meta might be the data center, but between Capital Power, Pembina Pipelines, and Kineticor, and I think it was Morgan Stanley or one of the big U.S. funds was putting some cash into all this. They're building huge power plants. I mean, a gigawatt of power, 900 megawatts, 1.8 megawatts of power. Now, the other thing is that the government of Alberta did promise that they would allow a percentage of their grid capacity to go to data centers because they had enough surplus grid capacity. And that's really how Meta got to the table so quickly. They're building a plant. It'll take 3 to 4 years to get a power plant, but they should be online with with a data center much quicker. Power plant engines take 3 to 4 years right now. That's just to get the engine. Then you got to finish installing it and grow it. Like our power plant that we've announced that we bought 3 months ago, we won't get delivery of it until January of 2030. So 3 years just to get delivery. And we're putting up a couple $100 million. So we're pretty serious about this.
That is impressive. Let's back up away from Alberta, away from pipelines, data centers, to the overall business climate in Canada. Because you've dealt in every province in the country, you deal internationally. Is Canada still a good place to invest? We've got Mark Carney just last week over in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia trying to drum up business. We saw the story that UAE was going to walk away from their $70 billion. I've since talked to Jean Charest, who's co-chair of the Canada UAE Business Council. He says, no, they're not walking away. It's just the Major Projects Office said they're not able to take investment now, but they are looking all over the place, including in Alberta. Is Canada a good place to invest, or do we still have too many regulatory burdens in the way?
I still believe in Canada. I think the regulatory burdens will weaken and soften with time, and that's as the market proves its capacity and ability to do things. And again, quietly, Keystone XL is being built. Quietly, a southern pipeline will get built. Quietly, a northern pipeline will get built. When I say quietly, it's not going to have the amplified noise. Remember when Trudeau said we're opposed to all of this? Carney says at least we're on side. And then Eby says I'm opposed, but now he's just saying, all right, well, as long as you pay me enough, I'm on side. Got the First Nations opposed, but they're getting paid off to be opposed, but they're getting paid off to be on side. So again, there's just more politics to solve. And that's where I wish that the Major Projects Office and its ability to just make things happen could accelerate private capital investment. And that's the biggest delay we've got, is getting true private capital at the table.
What about this major summit coming up in September? It's the 14th and 15th of September here in Toronto. Mark Carney bringing in sovereign wealth funds, pension funds. Is that a worthwhile endeavor? Will it put money into the system?
I think he has to be able to prove to the audience that his regulatory delays are being managed in a more thoughtful way. If we don't keep the conversation alive with global investment, and at one time, I started as an investment banker in the energy in the mid 1990s. The inbound capital from American oil companies, gas companies, and investors was compelling by the billions. And that's even to this day. CNRL is probably half owned by foreigners. So they're heavily invested in what we're doing as Canadians, whether it's through public companies or direct investment. And that's where I think what Carney's pitching is the right thing to pitch. Although as long as he doesn't say it's ultimately for Brookfield, we've all got something to work on.
Which every time he announces something, a critic somewhere says it's just for Brookfield.
There's a Brookfield angle, yeah.
Which is problematic. Anyway, Brett, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for helping us understand this from the world of major investing as opposed to, what I do with my RRSP. Thanks so much.
I'm looking forward to more.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Make sure you hit share, subscribe, send this by email to your Aunt May in Whitby. Let folks know about it. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Post-media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident.
we'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history, and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026, anywhere you get your podcasts.